Welcome back. This is the Onyx12. Now in the past, I was using the SSL Big 6, which is a fantastic board for recording and project studios. But in this space, the way it's configured, if I take a little wider shot, there is a jam rack sidecar that I was using with that, and I just don't really have the space to put that in here, at least configured the way this is. I need this work surface to put the subjects for videos on, whether it's a pedal or a keyboard or things like that. I could cut into this and put my jam rack in there, but instead I want to use more affordable gear as well that's a little more understandable and relatable to, I guess, the most number of people who watch the channel. Plus, the Mackie gear has been very popular on the channel, and Mackie's been very supportive as well in providing gear, starting with the Onyx16, and you saw recently the new battery-powered mixer. And I told them about this, and they were kind enough to then send over the Onyx12. Onyx12 hasn't been covered very much on YouTube, and I think it will be kind of the perfect sweet spot between the Onyx16, which is a little bit bigger than this, and the Onyx8. I never owned the Onyx16. That was sent to me by Mackie as a press unit. If you ever watched the reviews of that, you saw Paul Vanook from Recording Magazine reviewed the Onyx16 a couple of years ago. The one that I reviewed was a very exact same unit. He sent that to me right after he did that review, and then when I completed that, I sent it back to Mackie. So they have now sent me the Onyx12, and I think that this is really going to be a really good fit, and I'll explain why after I get this out of the box. One of the things that I wanted to also point out about my setup here is that I'm moving this more off the desk. Last week when I was doing the previous videos, I had everything set up over here on the side and that mixer, and it was just too congested. One of the things that's allowed me to create more space on my desk and move the mixer off to the side is this Heritage Audio RAM, which is a monitor controller with a great big volume knob on it. This thing is huge actually, but I actually really like it. So it's a completely passive device that allows you to set from 2 inputs and 2 outputs, and then, direct it to your monitors. It gives me right near my workstation here with the MacBook Pro and my monitor the ability to mute when I start doing voiceovers. I've used different versions of this kind of thing in the past, but this is certainly the nicest one I've used, and I don't mind that it's absolutely huge. I suppose I could do a review on that sometime if you want. I've often referred to this shotgun mic, which is a Sennheiser MKH 416. I've used this for years for voiceover. Recently though, I've been doing more and more voiceover with the Hollyland contact mic, which works great, just plugged directly into the iPhone. So that's a little background in that. With that, I am going to move ahead and then replace the Onyx8 here with the Onyx12. Maybe I'll just get out of the box, put it side by side, and we'll do a little comparison video once I get it unboxed. All right, so now I have it out of the box, and one of the things I want to do is stop and just show you the comparison of the size. Now it is quite a bit bigger. If we take a look at it from the top, you can see that there is more width, and there is also a much longer channel strip. So the thing is easily 3 inches deeper, and it just sort of ramps up back, and it's a lot taller on the back as well. Now, one of the reasons that it's longer is because this thing here has knobs and this has faders. And so these faders are actually a really nice, I think this is going to be a nice advantage. And it has a busing system with these switches as well, which I will go over later in the review. If you saw the review of the Onyx16, it's probably more similar to this board, just with more channels on it. Now, one of the things is that I've got a fairly shallow workspace here. And so in order to make this work with the power cord coming off the back, which is fairly stiff, I like that it has a regular IEC power cord. It's not a wall wart on the Onyx boards, but rather than having this stick against the wall, I got this right angle adapter. So I'm going to have the power, at least I'm going to try it this way. You can also buy right angle power cords, but I need the power cord angle coming off in this direction. So if I plug it in like this, if you look back here, it allows me to get that closer to the wall. I've used these either buying right angle power cords, or I have never used these adapters, but I've used right angle power cords before in order to be able to get things closer to the wall. I will have to slide it out to plug in things into these jacks, but at least that's part of, one of the ways that I can set this up. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it in and then power it up, and then we'll take a look at what this board offers. The first thing I did was check the firmware, because I did a firmware update on this one when I reviewed it a couple months ago, and it was set to firmware 1.1.17, which I did. It was not on that, but when I checked this one, it is on that firmware reversion. So I think it's up to date related to firmware. I also transferred my SD card, which has a playlist of some demo songs on there. And if I hit the SD card, you'll see that my playlist set is right in there, ready to go. So the operation of this is quite much the same as the other one. So it's very familiar to me anyway. The great thing about it though is that more of these things are separate. So I have on this channel 910, I can bring in USB 1.2 here. I can bring in USB 3.4, returning this from my DAW and my computer. And I can pretty much leave these two channels. These are stereo channels. I can leave these dedicated to those functions. I also get a full set of EQs and the other controls here for that, rather than some of them were shared. The SD card previously came in on the channel that was shared. If you look at it over here, SD card comes in and is shared with the Bluetooth. But here we have a line in here on 1314, but Bluetooth comes in on its own channel as well. So SD playback, USB 1.2, USB 3.4 all have their own channels with sliders. I can actually label that on here and leave it set up that way. And then it gives me 4 mono channels that I can bring in guest gear, as well as a stereo channel. So normally if I'm going to do some kind of a gear review where I'm doing a comparison, I actually have found that it's better for me to have 2 mono channels where I can adjust the panning right on the board, and also better EQ that I can operate. I also will often have my voiceover mic coming into one of these other channels. It could come in here on this channel, or it could come, I could bring it in on channel 5, or I could bring it in over here on channel 1 or 2. Otherwise, the features of this board are similar. We do have 2 monitor outputs instead of 1 that we had on the other board, and dedicated faders for the effects and for the monitors. And there's also busing that you can control with these buttons down here. And I'll get into that more in the review section of this video. So that's a quick overview of the setup. I'm going to switch the wires over and get started to see how this works out. Now, I just want to show you briefly what does come with this mixer. The power cord I showed you before, it does come with a USB cable. This thing does use USB-B on the back, and it's USB-B to A. I think that's pretty outdated. I really avoid using USB-A cables, so I'll probably just put this right back in the box. I usually keep the box, put the cables in there, and the manual and anything else that comes with it for the day that comes that I sell it or ship it back. It also comes with this quick start and wiring suggestion guide. These are always kind of pretty nice from Mackie. And it also comes with this card, which gives you a license for Waveform OEM, which is more advanced than Waveform Free and has a few less features than Waveform Pro. But anyway, it's a pretty full-featured digital audio workstation. You've seen a lot of coverage about this on my channel in the past. Now, previously we reviewed the Onyx 8 and the Onyx 16, and this one comes right in between with just a really perfect feature set for desktop applications in the studio. Also would work great for many live sound applications. In addition, with USB, it operates as a 12x4 audio interface. So you can bring in all 12 channels plus 2 bonus channels, which are your main mix, all back into your digital audio workstation for recording. So that means you can get each individual track, which is great for recording a band. And I just really like this setup for home recording as well, because I can use all of these and not worry about using some kind of app on your computer to handle the mixing. You can set up your monitor mix. I use this when I'm recording alone. It's also great if you're recording with other people, but it also works great as a live sound reinforcement mixer as well. In this video, we're going to do a walkthrough of all the features, how it works as an audio interface, go into a little more detail on the playback from SD card. Questions came up after the last video on the Onyx 8, and I'm going to show how some of the modes work on that a little bit later in the video. We're going to get into the effects processor, as well as go over how the connections on the back work, as well as some tricks on using the inserts in creative ways. So with that, let's get started. Now we're going to cover the main features of the Onyx 12. Now it's called a 12 because it can record 12 simultaneous streams to your computer over USB, and it can also play back 4 channels into stereo pairs. And I will get into the details of how it operates as an audio interface in a little bit. But if you look at it as a conventional mixer for microphones, it's basically got 8 channels. So you've got these 4 mono channels, and then you've got 4 more stereo channels. But if you use them with the microphone inputs on the back, they function like mono channels as well. So that allows you to mix together 8 different microphones, and you can also capture all of those separately into your computer. Now the first 4 channels have some special features. For one thing, they're mono. On the back of the board, they have mic inputs on each channel using the nice Onyx preamps. They also have line level inputs on 1/4 inch that can be switched, at least channels 1 and 2 can be switched to high Z, which is the switch you use to match the impedance correctly for plugging in a guitar or a bass guitar. And you do that right here with this switch. These channels and all the other channels also have a low cut that you can engage. And I would say that in most live situations, you would leave those engaged to reduce low end. Now you have the gain control here, and you set up the gain like any Mackie board by hitting the solo button and then allowing the gain to be set right here. Following that, we have the EQ section. This is identical to the other Onyx boards, where you have the high is set at 12K and the low is set at 80 Hertz. And Mackie boards have done this for years, being set up like that. The mid frequency is sweepable, and then you can cut and boost that. You have a very nice feature across these channels that allows you to test the effectiveness or the, what you're adding or boosting, or be ready to make a change to EQ by just engaging that button. EQ is not recorded when you're using this into your computer. You'll pick up these channels right after the mic preamp section, and then you'll record completely dry. You do have the option to record through USB or to SD card the full mix, and in that case, anything that you do here with EQ and effects can also be recorded, but only the stereo full mix will work that way. Now beyond here, we've got 2 channels that are labeled aux, and typically these are used for monitors. These are pre-fader, so the fader does not affect the signal going out from here. So you can send 2 more mixes out. They will wind up on these faders here, and then you have direct outputs on the back for each of these as well. Effects on the orange knob here will send effects to the built-in effects processor, and I'll show you more about that later. We've also covered that in previous videos. We have the pan knob, nice bright mute button, the solo button. Whenever you have something soloed, the Rude solo light comes on and that is kind of telling you that you've got something in the solo mode. And then we've got nice faders on all of these channels. This is something I like about this board compared to the Onyx8, which had rotary controls for this. This is a little bit more professional board with more features. And this is one of the reasons that I got this in. And I was using the 8 and I was feeling the limitations for the channels and some of the features on that. And I actually contacted Mackie and they were kind enough to send this to me. I really appreciate that. Mackie's been great support for this channel by providing these mixers for review and for me to do some long-term testing on. Now, one thing that's important on this, and we saw this on the 16 as well, is that there is a routing assignment that says LR on all of these channels. And if you leave that out, then you will not be routing this channel anywhere. It will actually come in and it will not go to the main. So if you want this to go to the main, and most of the time you would, then you enable left, right per channel. So if something's not playing, you're not hearing any sound, it might be that this button is in the out position. And I know that some people get a little bit confused by that, but it does give you the ability to bring things into a channel for recording over USB and then not play it into the main bus. And that can be useful in a number of situations. In a live situation, if you're using an external source for a click track that you don't want to go to the main speakers, but you do want it to go to the monitors, then that is one use of that. The other thing is if you're in a show and you have a comm setup for the stage manager, you could bring the comm feed into one of these channels and leave this out just to make sure that that never winds up going to the main. Of course, you can keep the fader down, but this would give you also assurance that you would never send the comm mic channel out to the main front of house speakers. So there are other possible potential uses for that, or like bringing in effects or things like that that you didn't want to go back into the main. Anyway, that is how the typical channels set up. The first two are the same. The next two are also the same, other than the fact that they don't have the high Z switches on them. And then you get into these stereo channels. Now this stereo channel is pretty much what you would think. You have left and right stereo ins. It does not have an insert on the back, where these do have a TRS insert where you could insert something using a Y cable on the first 4 channels. Typically, you would use that for a compressor. Now in these channels, we have left and right inputs, so you could plug in your guitar processor, you could plug in keyboards. Those would be the most common things you'd plug in. You could play back from some kind of device if you wanted to do that. Hook your computer up and play back directly from it. Now, if you go to the next channel over, this is what I like about this board compared to the Onyx8, which combines some of these features on the same channel. Here we've got separate channels for the SD card playback, USB 1.2 playback, so you can see I've got this labeled for back, and USB 3.4 playback, which I've got labeled as DAW. So whichever DAW I'm using, I've got a level control for it here. My computer, I always have a control for it here. And if I want to play back something from the SD card on here, I can do that right here. I'm going to get into some of the details on the SD card in a little bit, but before we do that, I'm going to move on and we're going to talk about channel 1314. Now this one is used for Bluetooth. It also on the back does have left and right inputs, so it's a normal channel. It doesn't have any EQ controls on it, but it does have the ability to do a line in on an 1/8 inch, and it does have the pairing and the ability to play back Bluetooth into this channel. And on that channel, you can also mix in Bluetooth. So if you're playing backing tracks off your phone, you can use Bluetooth to pair and engage Bluetooth right here. And then you can mix some of that into your monitors using this, or you can mix it into front of house playback. So it's very versatile if you're using this for any kind of a show and you want to be able to patch in something off your phone. Now your overall effects level is here for the internal effects. You can also route the effects out into an external unit. The effects here sends to the internal unit and to a jack on the back. There's also a plug on the back to put in a foot switch to defeat the effects. We have that on all the other boards, and actually almost all of the compact USB mixers that I have reviewed recently all have this kind of feature where you have a foot switch that you can use to defeat the effects. And the main reason is if you're singing or doing a show and now you want to start talking to the crowd, you don't want echo on your voice, and that allows you to turn that off. So looking at this, I'm going to go over this separately. All of the playback and things like this, we will get into that in a little bit here. But just to show you a review of the controls, once you set up the effects, you've got the effects master for the main. You also have effects master knobs here for each of your monitors. So if you want to add a little bit of your effects into the monitors, you can do monitor 1 and monitor 2 on these knobs. You also have a control room output on the back. That has a separate volume control, which is right here. And you also have a separate headphone volume. Your headphones are right here. Effects monitor, monitor 2, and then the main master section here. You have a solo, which can be done AFL or PFL. That means after the fader or pre-fader listen, after fader listen. And we have a mute button here, and then we also have the send button. So normally when you're recording off of this board via USB, you would pick up in your DAW or recording software on your computer channels 13 and 14. That's where the stereo mix appears over USB. But if you push this button down, it flips it to 1 and 2. So if you're using Teams or Zoom in particular, or other streaming software that are just happier when it sees the mix coming back off of an audio interface on 1 and 2, this allows you to take anything that's appearing here and send it to 1 and 2 back into your computer, or even into like an iOS device or your phone or a tablet or an iPad or something like that. Sometimes it's just a lot easier to do that if you can send it to 1, 2. So it's a really nice feature on this board. We've seen it on the other Onyx boards, and the Presonus boards in their AR series also have this same kind of feature. And then you have the control of the main output here. And with that, we've covered the top level features of the board. I guess I didn't mention the meters. We've got the headphone jack here, and we've got 48-volt phantom power. This provides phantom power to all of the microphone inputs. All right, so I have the Onyx12 out on the bench now, and the reason is we're going to take a look at the back of the board. And you can see right away we have an IEC type power cord, and it also works at 100 to 240 volts, 50 to 60 hertz at 40 watts. So this will work in almost every place in the world with direct mains power. We have a power switch right here. And then this shows the main output jacks. We've got main left and right on XLR, and then they're doubled up here. So you also have another pair that are on TR. Basically give you the same kind of signal. Two different versions of that. You have a separate control room output, which is how I would connect this in a studio situation. And there is a control room knob on the front for this. And here are the monitor sends. We talked about this when we looked at the front of the board. This is monitor 1 and this is monitor 2, and those are the sends for that. And then this, when you turn the effects knob, which is the yellow knob on each channel, it goes to the internal effects, but it also goes to this jack, and that allows you to run an external effects. So if you run external effects, then you would probably bring them back into one of these channels if it's a stereo kind of a effect device of some sort. This is the foot switch jack, where you can connect your foot switch to defeat the internal effects while you're talking. And then let's start back over here and take a look at, this is the USB input for running this back to your computer or other kind of device that supports USB, and that will give you 12 inputs plus the stereo mix for recording to your DAW and 2 different streams for playback back into this mixer. And now you can see what I was talking about when we looked at the front. We have all these 8 microphone inputs. Those are the Onyx style preamps on microphones. They're not combi jacks, which is interesting. So if you're going to plug in a guitar guitar, you'd plug it into these line inputs and then hit the high Z button on these two channels. That doesn't exist on these channels. And then the inserts, which I found particularly useful. Now, normally with an insert, you would use an unbalanced Y cable, so a TRS cable that goes in and out on the same jack as a Y cable. But Mackie boards, some other boards do too, but Mackie boards, for as long as I've used them, have this feature that you can tap off after the mic preamp by doing one click. So if you plug something in here with a normal instrument cable like this, not stereo one, and just plug it in and then push it to where it does one click like that, then here you're going to get a copy of what's coming in on channel 3. And if you remember that it does that, it can be really useful. In the old days, we used to tap off of these and then run it into a multi-track recorder like an ADAT machine or some other kind of reel-to-reel even you could do with that technique. But as I mentioned before, I've run this to other recorders so that I could like pick up the individual channels while also recording the stereo mix. One of the things that this does not do is when you're recording to the SD card, it only records the stereo mix. So this is a way to allow you to record to a recorder by just plugging in one jack in. Now there is another trick of plugging it in like this and then running this to an effects pedal, and it can be a really creative use of this if you're using it on a desktop synth setup or with a modular system. I've also got a way I use this with my Rockman, because normally I plug my Rockman X100 into these two channels, and then I pick up the left one like this and then run this into a reverb pedal. And if you're interested in that, I can show you that setup in a different video related to the Rockman. Anyway, I wanted to point out how useful this can be. Even though I rarely use the insert, I don't think I even have a compressor anymore that would work with this. So that's the first 4 channels. If I look at these channels, they either wind up being mono mic channels, or you have left and right inputs on each of these that you can use to plug in guitar processor or keyboard or any kind of a stereo device. If you're plugging in a mono device, just use the top one or the one labeled left on these channels, and you can operate the channel in mono. The other thing is that these can accept balanced or unbalanced signals. You can see right here. So that's a nice feature. On the tiny Zoom L6 that we looked at a few weeks ago, on these kind of channels, it took unbalanced signals. Now, if we look at channel 13, it has only the left and right. And this channel will also not record directly to your DAW. So this channel is the one that on the front is how you do Bluetooth pairing. And if you were also to look at the front, some of these channels like channel 910, if you're using it for USB 1.2, then you can't use it for these. And then this one can be USB 3.4, or you can use these jacks on the back. So with that, we've talked about almost everything except for the fact that this is USB Type B, which is a pretty tough connection, and more modern equipment is more so coming out with USB-C these days. But if you've got the right cable with the USB-C on the other end, this is not a problem at all. So I decided to go grab the Onyx 8 so you can do a direct comparison from this view, and you can see the kind of the size difference, and there's also quite a height difference. If we line these up, I would say that the Onyx 12 is almost probably about an inch higher, and it's quite a bit longer on the desktop. I mean, this looks like maybe 3 inches or so in. It's just bigger overall. It's not huge, and I believe that you can also get a rack mount for this. But the features, the upgrade in features compared to the more limited inputs on here makes it just much more comfortable for me to use in my current setup in the way I'm doing recording demos and tutorials and product reviews. This is just about the right size for my setup as it is right now. I'm going to show you more about SD playback that I didn't cover in the Onyx 8, but before I do that, I want to show you how this particular Onyx 12 mixer works as an audio interface. So back over on the computer, I'm in Studio One this time. If I go into Preferences and then to the Audio Setup, and then in Studio One, you go to Song Setup to see the mapping for the inputs and the outputs. You can see this is how the Onyx12 appears. Now you could set this up different ways, but I've set it up with 4 mono inputs, which is exactly what you see. And you can actually see that there's activity here because this is a voiceover mic that's getting picked up here on channel 1. And then there's 4 stereo inputs that look just like the front of the board, and then you can also pick up the main mix off of the board. Now you could configure this different ways. For example, if I wanted to add a stereo 3/4 to this, I can easily do this here in Studio One by just adding a stereo pair, and I'll just call this input 3/4, maybe stereo or something like that, and then click here on this matrix, and then this gives me another option for that. I have a color code in here where I use this color for my stereo inputs, so I can then add that to my list here of stereo inputs if I want to. You can set this up different ways, and it's pretty flexible. It's going to look similar, maybe a little bit different. Other DAWs don't have a matrix like this, but nonetheless, this is what it looks like in Studio One, and I think it's representative of how you're going to see this in many digital audio workstations. Now, if I look at the outputs, I've got the 2 different stereo outputs that I can use. By default, it's going to go to the main output, which is output 1 and 2, but I prefer to set this up so that 3 and 4 is my output. That way I've got a separate fader on the board for my digital audio workstation, and then I use this one here for playback from the computer. It just keeps it where I've got separate controls on the front of the panel that I can easily grab, especially if I'm not using a DAW at the time. And then I'll just hit apply here and go back in Studio One in the main output here. Then I choose this DAW setting in the console, and then that will give me that as my output into the mixer. Now, of course, to hear it back over on the mixer, I would need to have, I believe it's this button here engaged in order to be able to play it back on this channel. And the Onyx is a 24-bit device with up to 96 kilohertz on the sample rate. So back in Song Setup on the general page and then the general tab here, you can see that we've got 24-bit. This is actually for the project setup, but you can set the sample rate here from 44.1 to 96 for that device. So now we're going to talk about one of the details of the playback that somebody asked me about this after the last video, and I didn't know the answer, which is what happens as you go through a playlist on here, what will happen when it gets to the end of that playlist. And I found that it does basically depends on the setup here. When we press both of these in and we go to setup, if autoplay is off and you play something from SD card, it will just stop after that song or that track. But with it on, it will go to the next one within that folder. So we'll go back to the SD card, and I've got this one here set with keys. This is shorter samples. So if I go to the last one here, so that allowed you to see what it actually does. It will actually just continue to cycle and loop through that playlist. Now it got me thinking, what happens if you put in like drum loops? Can you actually just have it sequence through them? And the answer is, yeah, it does kind of work like that. So here's drum loops, and this one's got 4 plus a fill. So if I play through it, it will loop through these and it will continue to play them. And you can just listen to see what you think about this. I thought that was pretty cool. I wound up loading this up and then playing along with it, almost forgetting that this is just sort of a demo of playing back a series of loops. So you could kind of sequence through some drum loops. You could set up a metronome like this, or you could set up simple drum patterns to play along and practice with. Now, then I got excited about it. I'm like, well, what if I now hit record? Can I record while I'm playing these loops? That would be really cool for practicing. And no, that doesn't work. You can't, if you hit record here, it will stop those loops from playing back. Now I'm recording, I'll be picking up just the stereo file off my mic. So if you want to do any sort of overdubbing, then this is not the mixer that you're going to do that with. There are other mixers from Tascam and Zoom that do work as a digital recorder. This is the most simple version of a digital recorder. Anyway, that playback function is kind of cool. If you're playing backing tracks, now you know what happens when you go from one to the next. If you have this enabled, it will loop around within a folder, and you can set those folders up and put in your WAV or MP3 files using your computer and just load them onto the SD card. Now, a few words about the effects processor, which is actually a really nice quality, very versatile effects processor. I covered and did some sound demos in the Onyx 8 review, so I will keep this pretty short and just show the basic operation of it. But to set up effects on here, you again use this knob, this encoder, same encoder I was using on the SD card controls. It clicks when you push on this. And so once you're into an effect, if you click, then it selects it, and then you use this encoder like this to put in the value. In this case, it's milliseconds of delay. So a lot of times your slapback delays are going to be down kind of in this range. Then you click it to make that to go in there, and then your feedback, you can turn that down, which I typically would turn down. You've also got, if you go over here, you've got a high cut to get a more. In this particular case, the parameters are not the same on all the effects, but that's basically how you operate it. And if you go here, then you've got EQ that you can work with and presets. So that you've got 6 different presets that you can store. If you've got something that you really set up or you're going to use a lot, then you just push this down and you can either save or recall from that preset page. Now, to get to the master list of effects, you hit effects here, and then you can just go through these here like this and then choose the ones. The delay, echo, and the basic reverbs I think are the most useful. I'd rarely use chorusing or something like that in the studio, though you might occasionally use those, but the actual reverbs, echoes are pretty serviceable for recording or for live sound. And then to get out of this page, you can just hit back. You can hit SD to go to the SD card feature, but it won't work right now because I removed it. So I pulled that SD card out, and then in that case, that won't do anything. All right, so now let's talk about the settings for the Onyx 12. Onyx 8, 12, 16, they all work like this, where you have autoplay, you have the record mode. This record mode is for the SD card. This is not the record mode for the USB connection, but you can see these are the few choices you've got for recording to SD card. You've got 1648, 1696, 2448. I would say about 95% of the time I have it set here, but you can, if you have some reason you want to put it in the high res mode, you can, and it just takes up more space. Here is where you set the date and time, so that's very obvious. You can set that up in there. And then the factory reset, which I won't do, and then about, which shows the firmware revision number. And that's important. If it's not set to this, then I would be looking to update it. This, as of early 2025, I guess spring 2025, this is the latest firmware. I don't know that they'll have other firmware updates for this unit. It's been out a while. I imagine this is probably near the final version for that. So that's how the display, what's called the Studio Commands Center, works here related to the effects. All right, a few final comments on the Onyx 12. I've really enjoyed using this mixer. It's probably going to stay here as my main mixer for a little while so I can continue the review. And it has very few limitations for me. It's the first one of these, apart from the SSL Big 6, which is kind of in a different league. But this is the first one that's really both fit the desk. It mostly fits the desk. It's just a little tight in the back here. but it fits the desk. It's an analog mixer. It's got all the controls that I need. I can hook up enough things at once to record the kinds of demos and do the kinds of productions that I do in the studio from day to day. And it also has these trick channels, I guess the channels for SD playback, USB 1 and USB 3.4 playback on separate channels, which makes it just a lot easier to pick this thing up and use it. I can just turn it on, pick up my guitar. Right now I have this Rockman set up over here where I've got it patched in, and I can just go right into this channel and play back. And I have a lot of other experiments that I'm doing for other kinds of guitar processors, keyboards and things like that, and I can easily patch them in here. So with that, with the effects, the built-in effects, and that it has faders on it, it really does work quite nicely. So if you have questions on this board or any of the things we've covered recently on the channel, please post some comments below. And if you like this kind of video, consider subscribing, and we'll see you again in another video very soon. Thanks for watching.